You learn more about human nature from a broken expectation than from 100 promises. Because promises show people who they want to be. Disappointment shows who they are when the mask no longer serves them. And there is no broken expectation more revealing than the one that happens when you improve. When you get better at anything in any direction, the people around you make a promise, usually implicitly, sometimes explicitly. They promise to be glad for you. They promise that your growth is something they welcome, something they wanted for you, something they will celebrate when it arrives. And then it arrives, and the mask slips. Not all at once, not dramatically in most cases. It slips in the comment that sounds like a compliment, but lands like a diminishment. In the sudden discovery of your flaws, at exactly the moment your strengths became undeniable. In the gentle, persistent effort to remind you of who you used to be, conducted with just enough warmth to be deniable as anything other than concern. This is not random behavior. It is a coherent response to a specific threat, and understanding it precisely and without the comfort of charitable misinterpretation is the most useful thing you can do with the disappointment they just handed you. Hashtag Chapter 1. Growth as a threat to established systems. Every social system, whether a family, a friendship group, a workplace, or a romantic partnership, has an equilibrium, not a formal one, not one that anyone designed or agreed to. An equilibrium that developed organically through years of accumulated interaction, through the mutual calibration of expectations, roles, and status hierarchies that every group of people constructs simply by spending time together. Within this equilibrium, every person occupies a position, not just a social position, a functional one. You're the one who provides certain things, occupies certain roles, performs certain functions, and does not perform others. This distribution of function is not arbitrary. It developed because it was useful to the system, and it persists because systems, at every level from cellular to social, resist changes that threaten their existing organization. When you grow, when you develop a capacity you did not previously have, when you exit a role you previously occupied, when you achieve something that revises the status hierarchy the group had organized itself around. You're not just changing yourself. You're introducing a variable that the system did not accommodate and did not plan for. Your growth is a disruption to an arrangement that every other person in the system has organized their own position around. The response to that disruption is not personal. It is systemic, and it is almost always negative, regardless of what the individuals involved would consciously choose to feel. Hashtag Chapter 2. The specific mechanism of social threat detection. To understand why your growth generates hostility rather than celebration, you have to understand how human social threat detection actually operates at the neurological level, because the hostility is not a moral failure. It is a biological response executing exactly as designed. Human beings are intensely status-conscious creatures, and status is always relative. Your position in any social hierarchy is not an absolute quantity. It is a ratio, your capabilities, achievements, and social value in relation to the capabilities, achievements, and social value of the specific people around you. When that ratio shifts in your favor, the people whose relative position has declined experience it as a loss, not metaphorically, but neurologically. The same threat response pathways that activate in response to physical danger activate in response to status threat. This means that the people around you who are responding to your growth with subtle hostility are not experiencing it as a choice. They're experiencing a threat response and constructing post hoc justifications for it. Concern about your humility, observations about changes in your personality, revived critiques of flaws they previously tolerated without comment. The behavior feels to them like legitimate feedback, like concern, like honesty. Its actual generator is a neurological alarm that went off the moment your growth became undeniable, and which they are now rationalizing into a socially acceptable form. Understanding this does not make the behavior acceptable. It makes it readable, and readable threats are manageable in a way that mysterious ones are not. Hashtag Chapter 3. The people most likely to hate your growth. Not everyone in your life will respond to your growth with hostility. The people who do fall into recognizable categories, and identifying them precisely is more useful than the generic observation that some people won't support you. The first category is people whose own identity was partially constructed in relation to your previous limitations. If you were the less successful sibling, the less confident friend, the less competent colleague, and someone organized a portion of their own self-concept around being more successful, more confident, more competent than you, then your growth revises the comparative foundation of their identity. They're not hostile to your growth in isolation. They are hostile to what your growth does to the story they have been telling about themselves. The second category is people who made investments of time, attention, and social capital in a version of you that require their help. A person who positioned themselves as your mentor, your support system, your more experienced guide, has an investment in your continued need for guidance. Your competence is not just a neutral fact to them. It is a devaluation of the investment they made in your incompetence. The third category is people who are genuinely stagnant and have managed that stagnation by populating their environment with people who are also stagnant. Your movement is not just a personal choice. It is a disruption of the collective agreement to remain still, and it generates the same social pressure that any defection from a collective agreement generates, because it implies a judgment of the people who are not defecting, even when no such judgment was intended. Hashtag chapter 4, the language the hostility uses. Because the hostility generated by your growth is socially unacceptable in its raw form, it does not present as hostility. It presents as a set of concerns, observations, and feedback items that are individually defensible and collectively constitute a campaign to return you to your previous configuration. Learning to identify the language is essential, because without that identification, you will process it as legitimate feedback and incorporate it into your self-assessment, which is precisely what it is designed to produce. The most common form is the concern that you have changed. This is accurate. You have changed, that is the point, but it is delivered with an emotional valence that frames change as loss. The implication is that the previous version of you was better, more authentic, more genuinely yourself. What the subtext contains but never states is that the previous version was easier to be around, less threatening, more reliably occupying the position the social system had assigned to you. The second form is the sudden discovery of new flaws. Flaws that existed before your growth. Your arrogance, your coldness, your tendency to prioritize yourself, your distance, which were previously either unnoticed or tolerated without comment, are now raised with an urgency that correlates precisely with the timeline of your development. The third form is the comparative diminishment. Yes, you have achieved this. But have you considered this other thing you have not achieved, this person who has achieved more, this context in which your achievement is less significant than it appears? Each of these is individually deniable as anything other than honest feedback. In aggregate, they are a pressure campaign, and they should be analyzed as one. Hashtag chapter 5, the people who perform support while withdrawing. There is a category of response to your growth that is more sophisticated than overt hostility and considerably more damaging, because it is harder to identify and therefore harder to protect against. It is the performance of support while behaviorally withdrawing. The person running this pattern will say the right things. They will congratulate you. They will tell others they are proud of you. They will position themselves in every visible interaction as among your strongest supporters. And then, below the threshold of visibility, they will do the things that support is supposed to do: provide access, opportunity, endorsement, connection, the specific forms of assistance that the relationship previously made available to you, less and less, with justifications that are always individually reasonable. They're busy. The timing is not right. They have their own situation to manage. The cumulative effect of these individually reasonable withdrawals is a relationship that performs investment while systematically defunding it. This pattern is most common in people with sufficient social intelligence to understand that overt hostility to someone's growth is reputationally costly. It makes them look threatened rather than supportive, and sufficient investment in your previous position to be genuinely motivated to impede your departure from it. Identifying this pattern requires tracking behavior over time rather than evaluating individual interactions in isolation. The support is always visible in any single interaction. The withdrawal is only visible in the aggregate. Hashtag chapter 6, why your guilt is being weaponized. Almost everyone who goes through a period of genuine growth experiences guilt. Not because growth is wrong, but because growth involves the revision of arrangements that other people had organized their lives around. And the revision costs them something real, and the awareness of that real cost produces in a conscientious person a genuine moral discomfort. This guilt is legitimate. It is also one of the primary mechanisms through which other people slow your growth, often without consciously intending to. The person who makes visible their pain that you're changing, who communicates directly or indirectly that your growth is hurting them, that the version of you that is developing is someone they do not recognize, that they are losing you and the loss is significant, is providing you with information that, if processed without analytical distance, will function as a brake. Your guilt will translate into accommodation. The accommodation will slow the development. The slowing will restore, incrementally, the previous arrangement that the guilt was being used to protect. This is not necessarily a deliberate strategy. Most people who deploy guilt in this way genuinely feel what they are expressing. The feeling is real. The functional effect on your development is also real, and the two things are not in contradiction. A person can genuinely feel the pain of your departure from your previous configuration and simultaneously be, in their expression of that pain, an obstacle to your continued development. Recognizing both things simultaneously, the genuine feeling and the functional effect, is what allows you to respond with accuracy rather than either cold dismissal or the accommodation that restores what you are in the process of leaving. Hashtag chapter 7. The ones who cannot follow you and never could. There's a distinction that is uncomfortable enough that most personal growth frameworks avoid making it explicitly. The distinction between people who cannot follow you at the current moment because their own development has not yet brought them to the point where your current level is accessible, and people who will not be able to follow you at any future point because the gap between your trajectories is structural rather than temporal. The first category, people who are behind you but developing, are people whose relationship with you can survive your growth because their own growth will eventually reduce the distance. These people may struggle with the current gap. They may have the responses described in previous chapters, but the struggle is transitional, and the relationship is recoverable once their development catches up to yours, or once they have sufficiently processed the disruption your growth introduced. The second category is different. These are people whose trajectory is not parallel to yours, but perpendicular to it. People organized around values, identities, and life structures that are not earlier versions of the path you are on, but fundamentally different paths that your continued development will move you further away from, not closer to. With these people, there is no catching up. There is only the increasing distance produced by your continued movement. Identifying which category a given person occupies is one of the more consequential analytical tasks available to a person in genuine development, because the two categories require completely different responses, and applying the wrong response produces either premature abandonment of recoverable relationships or prolonged investment in unrecoverable ones. Hashtag chapter 8. The social narrative that follows your departure. When you grow sufficiently that leaving becomes inevitable. When the gap between where you are and where the people around you are has widened past the point where the relationship can bridge it, a social narrative about you will be constructed and circulated in your absence. It is worth knowing in advance what that narrative will contain. Not because you can prevent it or should invest energy in managing it, but because knowing it in advance removes the sting of surprise and the temptation to return to the previous configuration to correct the record. The narrative will typically contain two elements. The first is a reattribution of your departure. Rather than a natural consequence of your development and the incompatibility it produced, your leaving will be framed as a character flaw, arrogance, coldness, the inability to remain loyal to the people who knew you before you were whoever you are now. This reattribution is functional for the people circulating it because it converts a status threat into a moral failing, which allows them to discard the uncomfortable implications of your trajectory without engaging with them. The second element is a nostalgic reconstruction of who you used to be, upgraded in the retelling to make your departure seem even more inexplicable. The version of you they describe to each other will be warmer, more humble, more present than you actually were, because the contrast between that reconstructed version and the person who left makes the leaving seem less like a natural development and more like a betrayal. Neither element of this narrative has anything to do with you. Both have everything to do with the social system managing its own disruption in the only ways available to it. Hashtag chapter 9. What you must not do with their response. The hostility The guilt, the performance of support combined with its withdrawal, the narrative that follows your departure. These produce a set of predictable temptations that are each capable of derailing or substantially slowing your development if acted upon. The first temptation is the return. The discomfort of the hostility, the weight of the guilt, the loneliness produced by the increasing distance. These create an urgency to return to the previous configuration, to scale back the growth to a level the social system can accommodate, to restore the equilibrium that your development disrupted. This is the most destructive available response because it does not actually resolve the disruption. It suppresses your development to a level at which the disruption is temporarily invisible, while the forces that made the disruption inevitable continue to build underneath the suppression. The second temptation is the performance of your growth, the escalation of visible achievement and change behavior in response to the hostility, as a way of proving that the growth is real and cannot be undone. This is equally destructive because it converts internal development into a reaction to external criticism, which makes your trajectory dependent on the very people whose responses you're trying to transcend. The third temptation is the attempt to bring them with you. The extended investment of time and energy in trying to explain, persuade, or demonstrate your way into their acceptance of your development. This is almost always unsuccessful and always costly because the people who hate your growth do not hate it because they do not understand it. They hate it because they do. Hashtag Chapter 10. The architecture of leaving without bitterness. Leaving, in the sense of outgrowing the people and systems that cannot accommodate your development, does not require bitterness to execute, and bitterness, when it is present, is almost always a sign that the leaving is incomplete. Bitterness is the emotional residue of continued attachment to the system you have nominally exited, continued investment in the unfairness of their response, continued monitoring of their narrative about you, continued comparison of what they offered you to what you deserve. A person who has genuinely left does not require the people left behind to acknowledge the legitimacy of the departure, to revise their narrative, to admit that their hostility was generated by threat rather than genuine concern. These acknowledgments are not available from people who could not follow you, and requiring them means maintaining a connection to the people and the system that the leaving was supposed to sever. The architecture of clean departure is built from two things: accuracy and forward orientation. Accuracy means seeing the system, the people, and their response to your growth with the precision this script has been attempting to provide, without the distortion of either excessive charity or excessive contempt. Forward orientation means directing the attention and energy that would otherwise be consumed by the bitterness of unacknowledged departure into the continued development that the leaving was supposed to enable. The point of leaving is not to have left. It is to go somewhere, and bitterness, by definition, keeps you facing backward. Hashtag Chapter 11. Who grows with you versus who celebrates you shrinking. Among everything the hostility reveals, the most useful information it provides is the clearest and most accurate picture available of who actually belongs in the life you are building versus the life you are leaving. This is not a comfortable piece of information to have, because it frequently revises assessments of people you had high regard for, and because the revision is irreversible. Once you have seen someone's response to your growth clearly, you cannot unsee it. But it is the most reliable data available, because it is behavioral rather than declarative. Declarations of support, of love, of pride in your development are the performed self. Behavior when your growth makes the performance costly is the operative self, and the operative self is the one you will be in relationship with for the duration. The people who belong in the life you're building are identifiable not by their declarations, but by a specific behavioral signature. They do not require you to remain static to feel comfortable around you. Their sense of their own value is not destabilized by your development. They can be genuinely glad for your growth because their gladness does not cost them anything. It does not require them to suppress a threat response, to manage a revised status hierarchy, to perform a support they do not feel. These people exist. They're not common, and you will not find them clearly while you are surrounded by people whose primary orientation toward your growth is the management of the threat it poses to an equilibrium they cannot afford to lose. Hashtag closing. The cold arithmetic of departure. Here is what is true, stated without the softening that would make it more shareable but less accurate. The people who hate your growth will tell you a story about who you are becoming that is designed, consciously or not, to make you smaller. The story will sound like concern, like honesty, like the kind of feedback that only people who really know you can provide. It is not. It is a map of what they need you to remain in order for their own position to stay stable, presented as a description of your character. You are not obligated to accept the map. You are not obligated to navigate by it. You are not obligated to remain in proximity to the people distributing it long enough to hear the updated version they will produce when the first one fails to return you to your previous configuration. What you're about to leave behind is not a set of people. It is an arrangement, a set of mutually reinforcing positions and expectations and status hierarchies that were organized in part around a version of you that is no longer operational. The arrangement will survive your departure. It will find new components to fill the position you vacated. The people in it will find new reasons to believe that the problem was your growth rather than their response to it. None of that requires your participation. None of that requires your correction. The only thing your departure requires is your continued movement in the direction the growth has already established, forward, without apology, and without the backward-facing orientation that demands. They showed you who they are when the mask stopped serving them. The information was always the gift, even when the giving of it hurt.